Hello there, my name is Phil Williams and I would like to welcome you to Audio Angling, the podcast site of fishingfilmsandfacts.co.uk. Back in the 1970s and through on into the 1980s, Aberystwyth, midway along the Cardigan Bay coast, was arguably the in-place to fish. Like a magnet, it attracted anglers from just about everywhere with its huge hauls of taupe, thornback rays and huss, three species which have long been a big draw on the Welsh offshore scene. Add to that, big numbers of Black Bream also using the offshore reefs as the northerly limit, plus Porbeagle Sharks all over the bay, and was it any wonder then that its reputation spread so far and wide? One of the key players in all of this then, as now, was Aldebaran skipper Dave Taylor, who like Charlie Bartlett at nearby Abu Dhabi still takes angling parties out, though in Dave's case not for very much longer, as he plans to retire at the end of the 2011 summer season, which is just a few weeks away. Who better then to deliver a definitive angling history of, and comment on, the evolution of the offshore fishing grounds than a man who has spent almost every fishable day out there exploring it for the past 30 odd years. So, Dave, welcome to Audio Angling. And can we start by looking in some detail at both the species mix and balance within your operating range, starting as far back as your memory goes through to present, picking out any examples of where the fishing has changed, for better or for worse, with suggestions as to why perhaps this might be.
That's going back now to the late 70s, I suppose. In terms of the thornback ray, of course, there were innumerable then in the late 70s, but a drastic decline from about, when would it be? About late 90s, I guess, showed a decline. And as I was getting about 600 to 700 a year, I suppose, that's into the boat, not necessarily kept. And down to the present moment, zero 2011, 2010, and down to single figures from about 2005 onwards, I should think. The hass have remained about the same. Mackerel have gone down quite a bit, especially inshore the last few years. Quite a noticeable drop in their numbers. The bream are holding their own, really. There used to be a very cyclical population, and you'd get some good years and then you get some bad years in the 70s and early 80s. But generally since about 95, 96, because we had a good breeding year in 94, that they're holding their own nicely, and it's not so cyclical now. You get a steady run every year now, which is good. Gurnards have gone down a lot. All three species, the grey, the red and the tub, and most notably the tub, I suppose. We used to get quite a few reasonable sized fish, between £1 and £3-4 even, tub gurnard, but they've shown a drastic decline over the last 20 years. And I wouldn't mind betting that a lot of it's to do with the supply of gurnard as pot bait. It was an absolute disgrace. You see these frozen blocks of gurnard coming in. And of course, since old, what's his name? Hugh, whatever his name, Fernie Whittington. Yeah. Since he got going, and I think Rick Steen as well, promoting how well they taste. Everybody wants it now, but you can't get so many now. I don't know whether it's just in this bay that they've gone down, or general. I would suspect it's general decline. Codling, they're up and down. We don't get the classic run of cod that you do on, the southeast coast, or used to perhaps. On the east and north coast, we don't get them much in the winter. More of a summer species, if anything. And they're very up and down. 2011 has been very good, but then you'll get years where you hardly see any. So really, they've held their own, I suppose. Coalfish likewise up and down. Pollock, we never get much size apart from the wrecks, but there's plenty on the wrecks still. What else haven't I thought? Oh, taupe, yes. I think, in fact, taupe fishing probably improved over the last 10 years or so, inshore here especially. I suppose in the 90s there weren't quite so many inshore, but they've generally held their own, I suppose, and it's fortunate that they've stopped the commercial fishing for them now. You can only land 2, I think, a day, isn't it, as a bycatch or whatever. But yes, they're going quite well, really, and especially up north of here, off Aberystwyth area. You can still get good numbers, especially in May, June, July. They tend to scatter a bit more in late July, August, September, but when they scatter, they often come closer in, you know. Bass are doing quite well this year. I don't usually fish for bass very often, but they have been quite good this year, I must admit. It's trouble fishing for bass is we troll for them normally, and you can only fish so many rods when you're trolling, and so it does limit them. If people want to take turns in doing it, they're all right, but otherwise, if everybody wants to fish, it's a complete tangle, really. What other species are there? Oh, monkfish, yes, no, they show a drastic decline, like the skate have, I think. I haven't seen one now for 10, 12 years, maybe 15 years. Mind you, a part of that is due to the fact that I don't fish the clean ground so much now because of the lack of thornbacks. That applies also to thornbacks to some extent, you know. But saying that, we used to get them on the rough ground as well in the past. Don't get any now at all on the rough ground. No thornbacks at all. Full stop, really.
It's ironic that you highlight such a complete decline in thornback numbers here, when further up the coast are starting to make something of a comeback. In Cardigan Bay, for example, just the other side of the Limb Peninsula, Andy Owen, who skippers Morgan James too, sometimes has to move when fishing the clean ground to get away from the things, and the River Mersey, a little further to the north, over the back end months, is quite literally stuffed with rays. I also hear encouraging reports from other parts of the country, such as from the Wash round into the Thames estuary, but not for some reason Cardigan Bay, which is very odd, particularly as Aberystwyth was such an excellent ray venue. So when they went into decline, was it a gradual disappearance, or was it more sudden than that?
I suppose in terms of fish species, it's quite sudden, really, but that will go over 10 years, I guess, which is quite sudden for a species, I suppose. Lots of speculations as to why it's happened. The tangle netting, inshore tangle netting. I mean, there wasn't all that much done, but they had vast catches sometimes, tons. There's the theory about spiders, spider crab, the big invasion of those recently. They're eating the eggs, or could be that. A lot of beamers working offshore. Gradually they've been eating into the numbers. So we haven't got really any inshore trawling going on at all for them. You know, it's just as a bycatch more than anything at the moment. There's no tangle netting because there's no skate to catch, really. No thornback rays anyway.
And when you say no thornback rays, it is literally that. None at all.
Well, I haven't had any for the last 2 years. Charlie has, but I think it's only, I can't quite remember, that maximum of 10 or 15, if that. And he fishes a lot more clean ground than I do for taupe. So it's not zero. They're still getting them in the spider nets. They use tangle nets for spider crabs, but they do get them there, not many. So it's not absolutely zero, no.
What effect then, if at all, has the evolving species mix had on customer numbers?
I suppose, although I don't do it now, the winter and spring and autumn probably would affect numbers, but I don't do that now. I just fish really from May till September. So I'm overwhelmed with bookings, really. I have to turn people away. Could run 2 or 3 boats at summer weekends, but people ask me about them, but they seem to be quite happy with the taupe and bream, really.
So the thornback ray most certainly belongs in the losers category. But have there been any winners too in terms of increase to help offset their absence?
Increased, I suppose. Bream have increased from as I said before, not being bad years to good years all the time. They've been fairly good years consistently. So I think that's a success story. The taupe, probably holding their own. Maybe over the last 5 to 10 years they may have increased inshore, but compared to the late 70s, 80s, I suppose it was like that then, but there was a bit of a decline in the 90s, I guess, inshore, but no, there. This year hasn't been very good down off Aberystwyth, but I haven't been going out all that far, more concentrating on the bream this year, I think. The reason I haven't caught some is probably I haven't been out to the outer marks, you know. But they're still around, yes.
To help us understand the species distribution a little better, it might be no bad idea for us also to look at seabed geography within your operating area and what that means in terms of presence or absence within the mix of fish you have.
Right here you've got a very shallow bay basically. To get an average depth of over 100 feet you've got to go about 20 miles out from Aber. The vast majority of the ground is sand and small stones, mud. And then you get these areas where the boulders and cobbles are, which have been dropped by the glaciers and the ice age. That's really the basic ground form, and a lot of the species you'll get on these moraines, as the bream and all the cod family hang around there, the wrasse. And that's where I do the majority of my fishing, really, off those rough patches of ground, a bit restricted. You will get some gurnard, huss, taupe, dogs, but the majority of the species are on these shallower bouldery areas, boulders and cobbles. And the bream are all on these cobble areas and boulders. You don't get them on the clean ground at all. And I think the taupe really are attracted by the different species, and you get them a lot of the majority of the taupe on the rougher grounds as well.
I take it this is the area known as the Causeway.
Well, it's the old name, a causeway, quite shallow and runs out in a straight line like a road. When you see it from the shore at low water, it looked almost like a road going out from the shore at Wattlog, which is just north of Aber. So it was called the Causeway. And of course, there's the legend of the northerly of the three reefs, which is Sarn Badrig, was supposed to be where St Patrick walked across to Ireland, or the other way around, I can't remember which it was, but of course in the Ice Age it would have been dry for, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 miles from Aber, dry land.
What measure of surface area and length does a causeway span, and typically what are the water depths covering it?
The causeway, our causeway runs out to really about 6.5 miles. Average depth at low water, well, there are spots it goes down to 5 feet on the big springs, but you generally talk low water, I suppose, about 11, 12 feet, and it was a hazard to shipping when the deep drafted vessels used to ply their trade. A lot were wrecked on the three reef systems out in the bay here. There's many wrecked on there, especially when the tides were low. Of course, they're all got buoys on the end of them now, and of course all the navigation systems, so there's no worries now.
Are these wrecks fishable?
No, the ones that have been come to grief on the causeway, no, they've been smashed to pieces because it's so shallow there, really. They're mostly all wooden jobs. There's only the ones that are, the metal jobs, first, Second World War, further out beyond 20, 25 miles that are still there, and there's a couple of wrecks from the missile testing range at Aberystwyth that have been sunk through repeated hits, and they went down in the 70s and 80s. Very quickly populated as well. I remember I fished one about 6 months after it had sunk, and there was wreckfish on there then, big pouting, 2-3 pound jobs that you'll never get anywhere else in Cardigan Bay, only on racks. So it just shows you how quick they populate things.
What effect does tide size and seasonality have on the fishing in Cardigan Bay?
I suppose generally, because it's a fairly slack area of tide, usually when the tide is running it's good. It's only on the big springs sometimes it seems to go off sometimes, especially during a sunny afternoon when the tide eases, but generally fishing is better when the tide is running. On the biggest of tides, I suppose you might need to use about 8 ounces, maybe 10, but on the average tide you're only talking between 4 to 8 ounces, even less on the neaps. So seasonality, that's a big thing in Cardigan Bay, really. Over the winter months, say from end of October to middle of May, you're only talking a few species: huss, dogs, dabs, whiting, thornback, well they used to. Occasional gurnard you'd get. I don't fish the winter now, so I don't really know what it's like now, but the number of species dramatically increases during May. As I say, the other day I had 19 species on the boat with one club, so it's quite dramatic through May, the build-up of species on the reef. I fish the reefs in May and November, and I say you'll only get those 4 or 5 species. It's quite dramatic the way it's populated.
And of course, being situated on a west-facing coast with the prevailing west to southwesterly airflow will also have its part to play in both helping and at times, I suppose, hampering fish distribution, particularly in the shallower water, not to mention your ability to leave harbour to go out there looking for them.
Yes. Oh yeah, I mean, with us facing that, it's a pain in the backside quite often as regards cancellations. Last few years I've been I guess average 50% cancellations due to the onshore winds and the strength of them. It does colour up the water inshore, especially up here at Aberystwyth, north of the bay, and it does affect the mackerel fishing and occasionally the bream fishing as well. You've got all the rivers emptying into the bay as well. I know this year there was a lot of fresh water coming in, but the bream fishing up of Aberystwyth, so Charlie tells me, it was very good during that period. So.
Would stormy weather, for example, play havoc with the shallower parts of the reef?
Yes, I think it does, yeah. We do get a hell of a lot of weed stirred up. I don't know whether it actually alters the distribution of the stones and boulders. I suppose it must do in heavy storms. But yes, I mean, I've known periods where there wasn't much around at all in the summer after an unusual bout of wind. Yes, it was quite noticeable, but it soon picks up again, within a few days if we get reasonable weather after that. Yeah.
What was a typical catch like back in those early years, and how might that compare to present times?
Oh, well, there was a lot more thornbacks. That's the most noticeable thing, the thornback rays, of course. Say we're 600 to 700 a year. I don't know what that would be in a day. I think the biggest day we had was about 70 thornbacks in one day. But I suppose it's difficult. It would, casting my mind back, you might get between 5 and 20, 25 on a kind of average day thornbacks. And then you probably go on to the rough ground then for the bream. But these days now, over the last 10 years or so, I haven't bothered with the clean ground at all because there's so few thornbacks there. It's just a waste of time, really. So I now fish exclusively the rougher ground, the boulders and cobbles, unless somebody asks me specifically to try for some thornbacks. But the times I have done it, had none. And Charlie up north, who fishes more of the clean ground, especially the beginning of the season, he only gets a few thornbacks up there as well. And then in the 70s and 80s you get quite a lot of gurnard, the 3 types, some nice tub gurnard, especially on the bream grounds. Quite regularly get £1 to £2 fish. Best they ever had was £5.5, which is a huge thing. You could put your fist in its gob. And that's changed a lot. Monkfish, I haven't seen one in 15 years. We fish very shallow water, only about 15 feet, sandy, muddy bottoms. We had 7 on one day. I went to 44 pounds. That's changed completely. We never fished that area now. Mackerel were pretty good anywhere you stopped, but now that has changed, yes. They're more difficult to find now, especially inshore. What else is there? Hass, yes, compared to 70s, I suppose you probably get the same, maybe a little less with the hass out there now on the deeper marks. Oh yes, of course the Porbeagles, etc. They were there in the summer, but not now. Yes, you'd get perhaps more of a split between a clean ground and soft ground, and make more of a complete day perhaps fishing wise when you've got the 2 types of ground. So that does differ from when I was fishing in the 70s and 80s.
To sum the fishing comparison up then, is it now better, worse or just different?
I suppose slightly worse in terms of not biting the thornbacks and monkfish. But it's not too bad, I suppose, really. The bream are steady, and so, I would say slightly worse, but not perhaps as bad as other parts of the country where they haven't got these shallow reef system which commercial people can't fish. So, yeah, slightly worse, but not that bad, I suppose, really.
On the subject of Black Bream, that was the species which told me I had to visit Aberystwyth in the first place, as here was about as far north as the species ventured back then, which surprisingly they did in huge numbers and of better average size too, it has to be said, than today. Then, as you rounded the Limb Peninsula, nothing. But that isn't to say that they weren't there. Perhaps it was just the case that no one was fishing for them. Now, of course, they've really expanded the territory, with good numbers being predictably taken on a regular basis as far north as Luce Bay in Scotland. Why do you think back in the 1970s and 80s they were so abundant of Aberystwyth and Aberdovey, then so abruptly cut themselves off any further north in availability terms?
Don't know really whether the average sea temperature's gone up, whether that's helped them. There's been some very good breeding years, and 94 especially, they went mad. Whether that was a big help to them, so spread out, I don't really know. The only thing I'm thinking of is global warming and these cyclical things that they used to do, which seem to be even out now, but that's perhaps my guess. 94, they're everywhere. Little tiny things we had in the end of 94 and 95 and 96 were populated areas that I hadn't seen them on before, yes, especially further out. Where are we? 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 miles even flat hard ground. You got them after that 94 breeding year. I even had some once, I think it was the late 90s, where I had, was that middle 90s, where I had turbot. I had a couple of turbot and a couple of bream from the same area. So it just shows you how they expanded. I don't know, yes. Put it down to population increases and global warming, perhaps.
Bream obviously, and probably thankfully, are, despite their relatively small size, still very popular fish with anglers. So can we talk a little bit now about the tactics for them, which with your years of experience of watching anglers is something you should be very well placed to talk about with great authority. For example, here today, one angler's probably caught as many bream as everybody else on board put together, and not simply because he's fishing over the stern, because a couple of the others are also fishing over the stern area too. From what I've seen, it's the size of the hooks and baits that's important, and in that respect, his size 8 to 10 hooks with the tiniest sliver of squid on them is allowing the fish to take it down in one go, rather than having to work on a bait and gnaw it down to a takeable size.
Yes, I know. Generally, of course, it's the people furthest down tide that, on average, do catch the most. But yes, I mean they seem to like squid very much, and but I don't know. Sometimes to get the bigger bream out, often the big mackerel baits on biggish hooks really for bream, 2Os and things like that. You get some decent fish, but yes, it's often the case somebody using some certain type of tackle seem to get perhaps 50% of the fish on the boat, and I can't explain it really at all.
Well, today it looks like it's a sabiki rig.
Perhaps what they're generally feeding on looks a bit like what he's presenting on the seabed, yeah. I notice that quite often.
Also back then, I was a bit of a species hunter, always wanting to add more to my successes list, and again I looked to yourself and Aberystwyth to provide me with the goods, in this case a greater weaver. This area has long been renowned not only for its numbers of these fish, but also the size. So what's the situation with them today?
Yeah, weaver situation. They may have gone down slightly, I suppose, size-wise and numbers, but only a bit. You get them coming in from May through to the end of September, and they go mad occasionally around the breeding time, which was, I think it was around mid-June till the end of June. Quite often they spread everywhere, all over the rough ground, and you'd be picking them up on feathers 3 at a time.
But generally speaking, they prefer the cleaner ground.
Yes, you tend to get more over the clean ground, and often coming up with a mackerel, so you've got to be very careful all the time. Size-wise, what would the average be about? I don't know, 10 ounces perhaps average. The best I've had on the boat, I think it's about 1 3/4, something like that. But of course, I think it's still a joint record with Brighton, 2 1/4 pounds, isn't it? That one, the joint record, half of that came from Aber and the other one came from Brighton, I think. But yes, it's very unusual in Cardigan Bay for the weaver. I've got no idea why they choose to hang around here at all. Most odd.
Have you had much in the way of mishandling incidents on board?
No, I've been stung lightly once. Rather unpleasant, felt a bit nauseous, but it was over in a shortish time. Generally, no, I've got a little glossy thing which shows the weaver, so I show it around the novices, show them a picture of it, and generally everything comes up is a weaver. If it doesn't look like a mackerel, they shout, "Oh, weaver!" And it's most often than not a gurnard, more than weavers. Yeah, no handling probably. You just use a disgorger, the hook disgorger, and turn the hook upside down and shake it on the end of the disgorger, I hasten to add, and keep your hands well away. The majority will drop off. Some people like them for eating, of course, decent ones, and so I knock those on the head and chop the fins, the nasty bits, the gill cover and the dorsal, of course, off, and it's a reasonably tasty meal. So not any handling problems normally.
Now, one of the fish we haven't dealt with so far, and deliberately so because arguably I wanted to save the best until the last, is the Porbeagle shark. Throughout the 1980s, Cardigan Bay had a well-deserved reputation for producing these fish, but not anymore. So what has happened there?
Yes, I mean, in the 80s and I think early 90s, yes, you'd get the porgies in kind of June, July, August, I think even into September. I mean, I didn't make much of it, the porgies didn't go very often, but I used to listen to all the other boats, and yes, they were in reasonable numbers, and I'd see them on the surface every year. In fact, I had one once at the side of the boat. It came right up. There was a guy with a bream paternoster on, he had the lead hanging in the water, and the porbeagle came up and actually grabbed the lead. It was only about a foot below the surface, grabbed the lead and nearly pulled the rod over and swam away with the lead. So, but yes, you see them on the surface. The decline, I think, was in the 90s again, I think, if I remember. It seemed to be a fairly sharp decline over about 5 years, to the state now where I don't think any of the charter boats get them within the normal range out of Aber and Aberdyfi or Barmouth. I know some of the wrecking boats go out 50 miles, they do get occasional ones. Of course, they're still in reasonable numbers down at Pembrokeshire, 50 miles off Pembrokeshire. The reason, I don't know, or there might have been something to do with the overfishing down in Cornwall, reducing the numbers with the long lines, but there still seem to be fish down there off Cornwall, so I don't know. I mean, there's enough mackerel up here, I would have thought, to bring them in. So I don't really know what the answer to the decline in the bay is.
What was it like in terms of numbers and size range in its heyday? A lot of anglers, even today, will have little, if any, first-hand experience of that aspect of Cardigan Bay's history.
As I say, I didn't really fish too much for them on my boats, but I know, if I remember, about you might get 3-4 a day on some of the boats, and it was reasonable. And the size range, what I remember, I think it was about 60 up to about 120, 130. And I think one of the boats held the Welsh record for a short time, which was larger than that. That was the kind of size range, I think. The ones I had were on the boat were around about between 80 and 110, I think. But that wasn't many.
So how far and wide would they spread within the bay back then? And was there ever any preference noted for the type of ground to be fishing over?
It seemed to be just anywhere, really. I know I heard of private boats catching them within 2 miles of Aberystwyth. That'd be in the 80s, I think. Yes, I remember one guy had one on for about 15 minutes, and it was just skate gear he had on. Yes, it was on the gap in the causeway. A friend of mine, not a very big boat, and he had this thing on, and they saw it alongside the boat, but he couldn't get it. It was only a nylon trace, etc. But I still got the rod here somewhere, or the remains of it. So yes, you'd get them within 2 miles. But I think generally speaking, they were more numerous out beyond about 6-7 miles, really. Yeah, where there were more mackerel, from my memory, anyway.
Do you have any idea when the last one was caught?
Oh God, I can't remember. I'll say 2011 now, isn't it? 15 years ago, at a guess, probably. I think that was the last one I can remember. Yeah, so about then.
Porbeagles, along with a few other endangered cartilaginous species, now have some measure of protection afforded to them, which should hopefully see the numbers start to rise again, albeit very slowly. If or when that does ever happen, do you think that what attracted them to Cardigan Bay all those years ago might tempt them back again?
I would hope so, as long as the mackerel numbers hold up, and I suppose they do eat other species as well. But generally a bit depressed about the whole fishing scene, really. Yeah, I don't know really, perhaps they might, but I think generally fish stocks are going down, so I don't really know. It'd be nice to see them.
From my experience of fishing for porbeagles along the North Cornish coast, there's always tended to be something tangible in the way of identifiable feature, such as a reef or a headland, attracting them. But apparently that was not the case here in Cardigan Bay. But still they came. Have you any thoughts on what it might have been that was so appealing to them?
No idea at all. No idea at all, no. No, it's puzzled me. No, we've got no deep water close inshore like you'd get off northern Scotland and northern Devon and North Cornwall there. Those are classic Porbeagle areas. No, I mean there's no features. There's of course the 3 reef systems, but they didn't seem to attract more porgies than elsewhere, if I remember correctly. No, I've no idea at all. No.
But it would be nice to see them back.
Oh yes, it would be great. Yes, and hopefully that they'd all be returned. You know, like as goes with the taupe these days now. Yeah.
Over that same period of the chartering career, as well as species variety and mix changing, angling attitudes, tackle and tactics have also changed dramatically, and on all counts probably bear little resemblance to how things used to be.
Oh yes, of course you get much lighter gear being used now. Reels, of course, much smaller and less cumbersome. Use of heavy nyloners against wire for the taupe. Yes, it's all to the good, I think. Uptiding, that seemed to come in, I don't know when it was, in the late 80s, 90s. Especially from people from South Wales that come up with the uptiders, but due to the lack of tide up here, it's, I don't know whether it helps that much. It does help when it's taupe fishing, if you've got the bait scattered all over the place. In terms of tangles, that's the only thing I can think of. Yes, I mean, and the general awareness of conservation, of course, amongst anglers is much better these days. Much better. So a lot of the clubs would do whatever I told them, really. If I said a minimum size limit of £2 on bream, they'd probably put them all back, They're very good like that, generally.
What are your personal thoughts on the braid versus monofilament lines debate?
Oh, God, yes. Braid is ruddy awful stuff. There's no use at all for it in Cardigan Bay, anyway. There's no strong tide, so it's pointless, and the tangles are horrendous, especially when you're taupe fishing. No, I haven't actually made a ban, but I know Charlie Aberystwyth again, he won't have people fishing braid on the boat because of the tangle problems when you're taupe fishing. No, I'd back him up on that, really. No need for it.
I absolutely agree. Unless I need to use braid, it's mono every time. The amount of times I've cast out and had the line part, or had fish part the line which should never have broken free, just became too much. In many cases it was the result of unseen chafing due to debris collecting at the trace hook. The problem is that newcomers seem to see braid as the automatic choice these days, whereas that choice used to always be mono. And it's the newcomers who need the mono most, as it's they who are more at risk of losing fish on braid through inexperience, which the stretching nylon previously helped to cover up.
Oh yes, I totally agree with that. Yes, it's just not practical. Maybe for wreck fishing right out in the deep water off Aber, because there's very strong tides out there, but certainly not anything within 30 miles of the shore in Cardigan Bay, no.
And what about the changes in anglers' attitudes towards conservation? Many now seem to recognise that getting the most out of individual fish by enjoying the fight, then putting them back, beats getting the most they can get out of the sea and home into the freezer.
Yes, oh certainly, yes, it has. It's quite marked that, yes. Especially the angling clubs as such, yes, they're much more educated, and as I say, they'll go along with anything I say, really, to some extent. No, I always used to put a bag limit on thornbacks in the past when we used to get them, and size limit, of course, there was no minimum size limit for thornbacks. And they generally agree with that, nearly all of them, and are much more conservation minded now, yes. A lot of them will ask me, this is a female bream when they're in breeding plumage in May and June. You can tell the males and the females, and they'll put all the females back without hesitation. Yeah, they're good like that now.
Putting conservation onto a more formal footing, we repeatedly hear rumours these days of American-style legislation in the pipeline, which includes bag limits, slot limits, close seasons and even species bans, some of which is already here, such as no longer being able to bring taupe and common skate ashore for weighing to make a record claim. Is that something that angling needs, and if it does come onto the statute books, will it take much in the way of policing?
I think it needs to come in, yeah, and I'd back it wholeheartedly. Yes, you've got to have control like that. It works, from what I gather, it works well in America. So I would follow their example easily. Yes, certainly, and shake the various sea fishing committees that have the minimum sizes. Give them a shake up and tell them to put their minimum sizes up, especially for the bream around here. It's ridiculous. 9-inch overall minimum size, absolutely ridiculous. And for years they didn't have a minimum size on thornback rays at all. In fact, I don't know whether they do now. But yes, I'd back anything like that. Closed seasons, closed areas. I'm fully in favour of that.
You don't see it as an unwelcomed infringement on our freedom to fish?
No, I don't at all. A lot of the skippers wouldn't agree with me, but I think it's necessary.
Two of the examples I quoted, the taupe and the common skate, still appear in the national record list. Yet as the law now stands, it would be illegal to comply with the rules regarding weighing either on firm ground, which inevitably has led to the partial situation where both records have since been bettered, but cannot be claimed. Though in fairness, the anglers concerned would very likely not have brought these fish ashore anyway. So, I have a two-part question for you this time. Are rod caught records credible or even necessary? And should some other way of expressing the size of a fish be found which doesn't rely on either firm ground weighing or even a set of scales at all?
Difficult one. I mean, if you can get a kind of a formula for these fish. Taupe, I know, deal with taupe, and they're notoriously difficult to weigh or even measure. As such, they're not easy to measure, the girth and the length when they're thrashing around. Very difficult one. I don't really know. I hadn't thought about it all that much. I suppose if you worked hard at it and had some kind of a formula for measuring them, if one could, you could certainly measure the skate species. There'd be no problem. It's things like the sharks and the small sharks like the taupe, I suppose you'd have a problem with. Yes, I'm all flavour of putting things back. I don't know generally about the records.
One thing almost everyone seems to agree on is that weighing fish for a record claim at sea is not accurate enough.
No, most of the time it's not. It's only on very flat days you can get a reasonable reading. I don't know what emphasis is put on it these days. Perhaps there's less emphasis put on it than there was in the past on an actual record fish.
But weight is only one way of expressing a fish's size. Surely, equally as valid would be a point system based on length times maximum girth, which, like weight, would go up with an increase in either dimension. That could much more easily be done on the deck of a boat, along with a few photographs, after which the fish could be released. Might that perhaps be a solution?
Yes, if you could set something up like that, yes. Yes, I agree with that. That's nice. Nice way of doing it.
And might perhaps legally enforced bag limits and bans help charter skippers in their conservation efforts, as it isn't they who are telling the anglers what they can and can't do. All they're doing is simply reminding people of the law.
Oh yes, all in favour of that, certainly. Yes, it should have been done many years ago, especially in the case of the thornback rays.
With 30 odd years observing angling trends, both locally as well as nationally, how do you see the future for Cardigan Bay specifically, and sea angling generally?
I suppose as long as the commercial people don't find some way of decimating the bream stocks in the bay, I think it's got a good future. Of course, with the taupe being under legislation now, that's great. So generally, I suppose in a way it's a reasonable prospect. Huss, well, I know some of the potting boats do take huss, but whether that would have any effect on overall numbers, I don't know really, but I think they'll probably hold out, and the dogs of course. And the general assorted smaller species that hang around on the bream type grounds, I shouldn't think they'd be commercially exploited at all. So I suppose in a way for those species it's reasonable as a venue, aber. Mackerel fishing, however, well, I gave up for a while mackerel trips close inshore because they just weren't there, so that's a bit worrying in terms of mackerel fishing. I don't know whether that occurs around Wales and England in general, whether that's the case. A bit worrying, but I suppose aber, as long as the bream are in reasonable numbers, I think it would hold its own really.
And now, looking back over your career at Aber, what have been the highlights such as your best memories, and for balance at the other end of the spectrum, some of your worst memories too?
God, I can't remember the worst memory. Well, there was a day this year, in fact, it was fantastic. We went up what we call the pinnacles, and you just couldn't go wrong. As soon as we dropped down, there was bream on. They were coming up 2 or 3 at a time on the feathers, and the taupe were there virtually all day. You know, you'd get taupe and bream coming in at the same time. It's quite remarkable, and it's days like that, I think, over the years that have been really good, where you get the taupe and bream together and the other species.
It's heartening, actually, to hear that one of your highlight days is a recent trip as opposed to something from the dim and distant past.
Yes, yes.
What about notable individual fish?
Well, we had a bream once of, I think it was almost 4 pounds. That could have been one of the best fish I've seen, I think, really. That was really good that day. We had an 18 pound huss one day, 18 pound 2 ounce huss, which was terrific. Oh yeah, perhaps one of the days we had, I remember 69 taupe with a club from Pembroke area. He was a tackle dealer, Bill Brunton, I think his name was. But yeah, they went mad. They're 69. It was absolutely mad. One of the guys on the opposite side, I was on one side, he was on the other side, and he had to give up. He was just bringing taupe in one side, I was bringing them in the other side, and hooking them. Absolutely mad. You know, you get 3 or 4 on at the same time. That was quite a highlight, that.
And the worst memory?
Oh, there was one day some youngster picked up my rod, which I was fishing with, and didn't ask me about it. Started fishing, I didn't realise he'd had it, and managed to drop it overboard, or it was pulled overboard, and he just didn't bother to tell me and anything like that, and his father didn't say anything. That really annoyed me intensely. And there was a horrible day. I was we were beam on up on the pinnacles again at about 12 miles northwest of Aber. It was absolutely horrible, raining and beam on all day. Half the boat was sick. It was horrible. So we came in a little earlier, got into the harbour, and then I fell in between the boat and the quayside. Luckily, I had plenty to grab on, but that just about topped it. I'd have had enough, certainly, by the end of that day.
But other than that, it's been a good experience and a great way to make a living.
Yes, I mean, the good days have been fantastic. And the bad days you just have to put up with, really. I suppose it is a very privileged lifestyle, but in the winter, when you're maintaining the thing, it's pretty grim. But yes, I mean, the good days, when you're doing things like that in the winter, the good days you always remember, and that's what's kept me going, I suppose, really. And all the marvellous views out at sea here, all the different birds and the different weather I've seen out here. Been yes, privilege, I suppose.
So all things considered, no regrets.
No, so there's none really. Yes.
And no potential reconsideration of your pending retirement either. You feel it's the right time to go.
Yes. I want to do other things now. I want to do a bit more walking and tidy the house, which is a tip, and tidy my garden, which is a tip. Yeah, when in the summer I just get so many phone calls and God knows what cancellations and paperwork. I just don't have time to do anything else virtually. Yeah, so yes, I want a bit more time to myself. I might still go out privately, and I might operate my friend's charter boat occasionally in the summer, just for a few trips, but I want more time to myself.
Rather like being a grandparent, I suppose. Okay, occasionally, but in the knowledge that you can always hand them back when you've had enough.
Yes.